everyone, this is Grandmaster Eugene Perelshteyn, and together with chesslecture.com, I'd like to welcome you to today's lecture, where I'm gonna go over my best game against Irina Krush from the recent tournament that I won, Spice Cup Invitational. It's a Category 12 tournament organized by Susan Folger. So let's begin. I'm playing black against Irina Krush, and she plays d4. This time I decided to choose the King's Indian defense. Knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, e4, d6. And now Irina plays bishop e2. This is a rare line of the King's Indian called the Averbakh variation. Now typically we see knight f3 is predominantly the main line. So let's think and ask ourselves, why does white play bishop e2 and neglect the development of the g1 knight? And the answer is actually quite simple. Typically when we play knight f3 and bishop e3 later on, that allows for knight g4 idea. But with the bishop on e2 safely keeping the g4 square in check, white can simply play bishop e3 later, or even bishop g5, and even has a choice to play f3 later on if need to. So this is kind of a very flexible way to develop. In addition, of course, white can follow up with knight f3 and transpose to the regular classical setup. So I decided to also play a kind of waiting move, you can say knight a6 instead of castle, in order to keep my options open. Again, knight a6 is a favorite idea of mine, which I use in all types of King's Indians, with the main idea behind this is to kind of keep my options open and strike e5 or c5 at the right moment and just see what white is going to do next. For example, if she plays knight f3, I could play castle and transpose to the one of the main lines of the knight a6 variation. However, Irina plays bishop g5, and she's still trying to follow up with Averbakh type of ideas, where now if I play castles, after queen d2, we are in one of the main lines of the Averbakh setup. And again, notice that I cannot play h6 now, and it's harder for black to play e5 since I don't want to get my knight pinned so early in the game. But it's still playable for black, of course, but I decided to mix things up and play h6, which I think is a very, very interesting idea to avoid playing the Averbakh variation completely. So now Irina faces with some interesting choices. She could play bishop h4, bishop f4, or the natural looking bishop e3, which happened in the game. And now I simply play e5. I'm not afraid of d takes e, d takes e, queen takes d8, because these endgames are fine for black. I'm going to play c6, king is safe on e7 or even e8, and then simply develop my pieces. So taking on e5 is not really good, and that really limits white's choices, because she can't really play knight f3 because of knight g4, and now let's say bishop c1. I can simply take on d4, knight takes, and take advantage of the weak king side with my queen h4 move. All of a sudden white has to play g3 and make all sorts of weaknesses on the king side. Okay, so that leaves Irina with d5, and that's what she played in the game. And now you could see that idea knight a6 paid off, because knight is coming to c5, and this is exactly what I wanted to achieve, and my next move is knight c5. Now if the g1 knight was on f3, then knight d2 would defend the e4 pawn, but now it's not so easy how to defend the e4 pawn, because f3, and now the g1 knight cannot be developed, or the natural looking queen c2 would allow knight g4 in the future, or I can simply castles and continue with my kingside attack with knight g4 and f5 later on. So again, this is a very interesting position after knight c5, and white doesn't have a sufficient answer for my knight c5 move. Again, if you think about taking on c5, you have to realize that the dark squares are going to be a constant problem in white's camp. I'm going to play h5, bishop h6, castles, knight e8, knight d6, and play on both sides with f5 or even c6. And just simply a great position, and white has no counterplay whatsoever. So taking on c5 is definitely bad. And Irina decided to play f3. I would prefer to play queen c2, because simply I don't like to play f3 and limit the knight on g1. And I decided to take advantage of f3 and immediately play knight h5. So let's take a look what happened. The knight on g1 cannot be developed. Knight h3 simply bad due to bishop takes h3. Bishop on e2 is completely misplaced. And if you take a closer look at this pawn structure, this is very similar to the Sameish line in King's Indian. Except in the Sameish, the bishop was on f1, the knight is on b8, and it's a completely different story. Now, I think it's very, very good for black. I think I have at least one or maybe two tempi up in this position compared to the regular Sameish. So Irina decided to kick my knight out with b4, a very committal move on the queen side. Knight a6, gaining a tempo on the pawn. a3, and simply castles. So now you could simply say that black is slightly better out of the opening if you're a King's Indian player. Because black solved all of his problems. The knight is coming to f4, king is castled, f5 is coming up, whereas white is not sure what to do with the g1 knight, and another main problem is what to do with the king. Castling queenside is going to be dangerous because of the b4, c4, a3 exposed pawns. It's going to be very wide open, potentially on the queen side. So it's quite difficult to play as white. So Irina played queen d2, a logical move, keeping an eye on the f4 square and potentially preparing the bishop d1, knight g2 plan. And I simply play king h7, a kind of waiting move, and the useful move in the future to defend the h6 pawn. Now Irina plays bishop d3 with idea knight g2, and of course immediately knight f4. I'm not afraid of bishop takes, pawn takes, because this is the dream position of any black player in King's Indian. My g7 bishop is just dominating the dark squares. And the move that I expected is bishop c2, followed by maybe g3, just trying to keep my knight out and solidify the position. But Irina is a very brave chess player. She's not afraid, and she plays castles right into the crossfire of potential attack on the queen side. So a very, very brave move. Now let's take a look at bishop c2 and try to understand why Irina didn't like this move. Well, I do have this idea queen g5, and now if g3, knight g2 check. So you see the idea, queen has to take, and queen takes e3 simply gives black a very good advantage, because there is no longer dark square bishop for white. But g3 is of course a bad move, and maybe even king f1 is playable in this position, with the idea to play g3. And now it's unclear what to do with my queen, because g3 is coming up. I might just go back and wait for g3 committal move, and now just go back again. And basically my next move is going to be f5. So again, the king is a little bit uncomfortable, even on the king side, because f5, f4. So again, I would prefer, I would probably prefer black here, but it's not that clear still what's going to happen later on in the game. So, but it's a different approach, and instead of bishop c2, Irina played castle. So there are several approaches now to my play. I could simply take the bishop and go for f5. This of course allows knight g2, and I do have the two bishops, but the position remains kind of solid for white, and potentially h4 g4 might be an attack, or a little annoying attack, and but no problem, it's probably playable for black. But somehow I wanted more from this position. I just felt that the knight on g1 and the king on c1 are just so misplaced, and they just wanted to rip open the queen side, even if it costs me a pawn. So that's why I played c5. A very interesting approach to opening up the queen side. I'm almost forcing white to take, because b5 is simply bad. I'm going to go knight b8, a6, and open up the a file. And of course f5 is coming up in the future. So white takes, pawn takes, and now bishop c2. So the pawn on d6 cannot be defended, but I don't really care. And I continue my plan of opening up the queen side as much as I can. So again c5. And now Irina decides to play b5, which is a good move. It's really hard to keep any more tension on the queen side. For example, even if b takes c, this is simply bad because of queen a5, and the a3 pawn is now in trouble. And there are really no other good alternatives besides b5. So I play knight b8, and knight is going to go on d7, and now I have a nice open square for my queen on c5, on a5. So this is, you could say, a critical position in the game, and now Irina has two ways of winning the pawn. One is queen takes d6. This is what she played in the game. But the other one, the one that I actually missed during the game, is bishop takes c5, which is, I think, even a little bit stronger. And actually, when I played knight b8, I did see bishop takes c5, and I calculated this line that maybe I can simply sacrifice an exchange and then try to trap the rook on d8 with either knight d7 or bishop d7, and then bishop f6. But actually, I analyzed this further, and in all of these lines, white is actually much better, if not winning, due to some beautiful resources. So for example, knight d7, knight d5, knight e6, and rook e8. And all of a sudden, the knight on d5 does an excellent job of keeping the rook very safe on e8. And really, I am in some kind of zugzwang now because I can't make any progress. I can't trap the rook. And I'm down in exchange and the pawn. So this is simply bad. You might consider bishop d7 with idea bishop f6. And now there is this beautiful resource. So for example, knight d5, knight takes, e takes d, and you think, well, you just win a rook or win an exchange back after bishop f6. And the beautiful resource is d6 double x clamp. This is truly an amazing move, and it turns out that white is winning now because of this move. If bishop takes, bishop e4, and my rook cannot be saved. If I don't take the rook, I cannot stop bishop e4. And if I play bishop f5, well, this simply opens the squares for the rook. Rook e8 or rook c8, and white is completely winning. So you see this beautiful idea d6, and white is winning on that line. So taking on c5 is bad, and the correct move here is bishop e6. I sacked one pawn, I'm not afraid to sack another one, as long as I open up the queen side and I have plenty of counterplay for my pieces. Now g3, temporarily pushing the knight away, because now the knight cannot go to e6, and it's a little bit misplaced on h5. And now simply bishop takes d6. Of course I can play rook e8, however after c5 it's not clear that sacking two pawns gives me enough counterplay. But the correct move here is bishop takes c4, sacrificing the exchange, and in this position I do have enough compensation for the exchange after bishop takes f8 and simply queen takes f8. The king is wide open, a3 pawn is hanging, and I'm going to open up the position with a6 later on. Should be plenty of compensation for the exchange, and white has to play precisely here in order not to get in trouble. So let's go back. So after bishop takes c5, correct move is bishop e6, and the move that Irina played is queen takes d6. Now of course queen a5, hitting the knight and the pawn, king b2, and simply knight d7. And I'm quite happy with my position. Black is down a pawn, but I'm going to play knight e6, knight d4, and open up the queen side with a6 later on. Whereas white doesn't have any attack at all, and still lacking the development with knight g1, rook h1. I didn't even consider moves such as knight takes g2, because it's only helping white. For example, bishop takes c5, and bishop is going to go to b4, it's simply good position, and my knight is misplaced on g2. So correct move is knight d7. And now I think Irina started to play a little bit out of plan. She couldn't find a good plan, and she plays bishop d3. It's unclear what was the idea of this move. And another reason why I like this position is that it's really hard to play as white, because it's clear that I'm going to play knight e6, knight d4, potentially a6 later on, all these weak squares, and the king is wide open, and white really has to consolidate and play very carefully in order not to get in trouble. So maybe it's better to play simple queen d2, knight e6, knight d5, and of course I don't want to trade, I'm going to go back to d8, I'm going to play knight d4, but at least the powerful knight on d5 would keep my attack, would delay my attack at least for a while. So maybe that's what she should have played. But after bishop b3, I play knight e6, and now I'm getting dangerous initiative right away. And now I think she should have played maybe knight d5. And again, Irina keeps on the wrong path, and now she plays queen c6, sort of helping me to put my rook on the b file. And I play rook b8. And what probably happened is that she didn't realize that rook takes d7 loses after simple takes, rook d8 attacking the queen. Now queen c6 and rook d3. And this was my main idea. And now all of a sudden white really has no defense. And white is completely lost. All of my pieces are coming through. There is no defense. So I played rook b8. And now Irina plays finally knight d5. Alright, so now it's time to open up the queen side even more. I play a6. A very useful move. a4, a takes b, and c takes b. And now, of course, knight d4. This is exactly what I wanted. Now, all of a sudden, this knight on d4 is a key in all of my attack. Of course, you can't really take the knight, because now you're going to open up my bishop on g7, which is really deadly. So, queen c7, trying to exchange queens. And I have a very beautiful move, queen a8, where my queen is doing quite fine, and white's queen on c7 is a little bit misplaced, and so Irina prepares a retreat with bishop d2. And in this moment I already spotted a very beautiful combination, starting with the move rook b7. So she has to play queen a5. Going queen d6 is way too dangerous. The queen might get trapped. And rook a7, forcing queen c3. And now the key here is, how do you break through on the queen side and get to the king? The pawns on a4 and d5 are keeping the king quite safe, and it's not so easy to break through. But the beautiful combination is to finally open up the queen side for good by getting rid of the pawns. One pawn at a time. Rook takes a4. Exclam. You might think that, wait, didn't I just blunder that knight c7 is intermezzo hitting my queen? Because of course bishop takes a4, queen takes a4 is simply bad, hitting the rook, and the pawn on b5 is gone. But no, knight c7, I did see. And now simple queen a7. Bishop takes a4. Now queen takes a4 is no good because the knight is defending the pawn. And queen takes c7. And if you take a closer look at this position, you realize that although black is down in exchange, it doesn't matter because all of black's pieces are so much better than white's, and the white's king is so wide open. And notice that the knight on g1 and rook on h1 are still simply watching the king getting slaughtered. So knight b6 is coming up. So Irina anticipates that with rook a1. Knight b6. And now finally knight h3. So you see it took 32 moves for that poor knight to develop. And I'm continuing with simple development of my pieces, bishop e6, preparing knight c4 and rook a8. Now Irina was on top of everything else in time trouble, but her position is already so bad it's hard to defend. She plays rook e1, and now I finish the game off in style with the rook a8, hitting the bishop, bishop c2, knight takes b5, hitting the queen, queen e3 loses to knight c4 fork, so really the only move was queen d3, and now finishing touch c4, and white can resign. If queen e3, then c3 check, bishop takes, knight check, and it's over. So after c4, Irina resigned, and really there is no defense. So I hope you liked this game. I think it's a very instructive attack in King's Indian on the queen side, and most importantly, you have to understand when to sacrifice pawns and why it's important to sacrifice pawns for opening up the king and piece activity.
This is Grandmaster Damian Lemos here for onlinechesslessons.net. First of all, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you would like to receive more free chess videos from us, you can just click the subscribe button below. I would also highly recommend signing up for my free mail course, the 10 Grandmaster Secrets to Dominate Chess. During this exclusive course from onlinechesslessons.net, I'll share with you my own Grandmaster shortcuts to effective attacking, defending, and growth hacks to improving your chess without complicated books or memorization. So sign up by clicking the sidebar on the right, and I know you won't be disappointed. Once more, this is Damian for onlinechesslessons.net, and I'll see you in my videos. Thank you.